used to be the worst person for managing people. I was absolutely terrible at it. I hated it. I didn't want to do it, and I avoided it wherever possible. You need to have the attitude, which is that actually people probably aren't going to give you a really bad time. It might happen, but in general, people have been pretty supportive. And in any sales activity I've done, I've held back in some way, I've been reticent. And then when you start doing it, you realize actually the rejection's nowhere near as bad as you thought it was going to be. Was the thing that unlocked it for me. When previously I saw managing people as a set of opaque people skills, an attitude, and a capability that I needed to develop, but I had no idea how, and quite the opposite, had been told that I didn't have what it takes.
Today's guest is Alexis Kingsbury, an award-winning entrepreneur with 2 software businesses and a consulting practice serving over 600 organisations around the world, including well-known brands such as Sony, 3M, Fitness First and Pepsi. Alexis is a good friend and a self-confessed process geek who's helped me loads over the years to improve the way I run my business. I'm excited to have him on the show to share his insights on everything from the process of a winning pitch to how to recruit and grow high-performing teams. If you enjoy what you hear, please leave a review, like, comment and subscribe. It would mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Alexis, welcome to the podcast. My first question for you. In life, what's the most important thing you've ever had to pitch for?
I'd say probably that my wife would marry me. I'd say that's in life, that's what it's been. And as a result, I came up with a really good plan for doing that. It might sound corny, but it was I booked a trip to Paris. Oddly enough, she still didn't know that proposal was coming. Lots of people think, oh, well, surely you knew at that point. She didn't. And so my plan was that I would take her to this really romantic restaurant in Paris, and we'd have this little booth that I'd arranged, and it would just be this nice, quiet, beautiful thing, and thing. In fact, that was Plan F. Plan A was that I would propose in front of the Louvre. I knew that was a monument, a landmark that she loved, and particularly with it lit up at night, it would look stunning. When we got there, it was turned off and dark and had people nearby that felt dangerous. So I kind of hurried us on and thought, well, that's okay, because Plan B, there's Pont des Arts on the river, where they've got all these padlocks of lovers who have secured their love as padlocks to the bridge. I thought, well, that'll be perfect. I'll do it there. But it started to rain, and Sarah was getting really angry about the fact that her hair that had been kind of rolled was now sort of starting to come out, and she was wondering why we even needed to do that, because we could have just got a taxi to the restaurant, and why was I making her walk there? And then the slats on the bridge, her high heels kept on getting stuck, and I had to keep like pulling them out, and she was getting more and more irate. And at one point I was pulling one out and thinking, well, I'm kneeling down already. Maybe I should do it here. And so, but it didn't quite work. So I didn't. And then we got to the restaurant, which she was pretty annoyed by that point, and we were both slightly wet. And they put us. Firstly, they didn't even take us to the table. They took us to this anteroom, which was brightly lit, despite sort of stone and beautiful architecture. But when it's brightly lit and you're in the middle of the room, it feels very strange. Yeah. And the staff were Parisian, and so in their special, hilarious way, consistently mean to all new customers. And so that didn't feel right. And then when we went to our table, it wasn't in the booth. It was right in the middle of the room and brightly lit again. So I didn't do it there. So I thought, well, we'll go to the Eiffel Tower and we'll do it there. But by that point, it was absolutely pissing it down and torrential rain. So then we went back to the hotel, and I thought, well, in which case I'll take her to the little bar at the bottom of the hotel where there's a mini grand piano, and I'll play a song that I've actually learned so that I can play it for her that she loves, but one by Craig Armstrong. It's the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet, and we'll buy some champagne. And we got there and the bar was closed and the piano was like covered with a sheet and all roped off. And so I ended up, after carrying the ring all the way around Paris and like being weird, because every time she'd go to hug me, I'd like slightly guard her so that she didn't feel this box that was in my pocket. I ended up proposing while taking her shoes off, sat on the bed back in the hotel room. And so I proposed, I asked the question, and she paused for a really long time and then said, "I so hoped you'd ask."
Oh.
And I said, "Is that yes?" Then she went, "Yes." And then we got a mini bottle of champagne out the fridge and called her parents who had already asked, and so on. And I think that as a pitch is interesting because, firstly, what I was going to say was short. The communication was important.
Mm-hmm.
How I was delivering it was key. Doing it in the wrong way, if I had done it offhand, if I'd just done it in the taxi and gone, I was actually going to ask you to marry me tonight, I'm not sure I'd have got a yes.
Interesting.
If I'd done it on the bridge when her foot was still stuck in the slat, I think it might have been a no. I think and I think that's key, is that when I think about the most important pitches in my life, preparation and contingency plans and thinking about the setting and the style and the method of delivery are as important as the content.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's been the most important pitch in my life.
You demonstrated.
Unfortunately, she said that yes, and we got married, and I've got 2 wonderful children, and the last 11 years of marriage have been the happiest I could possibly have ever imagined.
What a lovely story, and proper flexibility in the pitch there. So well done. So if that's the one that was the most significant, what's the pitch that's got away? Have you had a moment in your life where you thought, I would have loved, not necessarily I regret not seeing that happen, but I'd have loved to have seen what had happened if that had worked out?
Yeah, the playful part of me immediately thinks, yeah, it was the lady I proposed to the week before. No, that's not what happened. The one that got away, I'd say, the biggest potential missed opportunity for me have tended to be the really big kind of enterprisey deals that I wasn't ready for.
Right.
The ones where, for whatever reason, for one of my, I've got a couple of software businesses. I've also still got a consulting practice, although I'm not operational now in one of the software businesses and the consulting practice. Those teams self-manage, but in particularly those other 2 businesses, there's been various points at which someone's contacted me from a very large company. I remember 2 in particular, one from Barclays and one from Visa, where they approach us and say, we're interested, and they wanted to be pitched. They wanted make the case.
Yeah.
And I feel, to my great discredit, I was woefully underprepared for that. I was not ready to be able to communicate effectively why this would make such a good decision for them and be a good partnership. Partly because at that point, most of our customers had been smaller or mid-market businesses, and therefore, we'd got a bit of a process running for that for my team, who were doing discovery calls, online on Zoom. And that was normal, and that worked well for us. And so there's a good argument to say, well, that's the business model. Like, you've got to pick your lane and your ideal customer persona and so on. But when I reflect back, a part of me does think, actually, what if I had set up the business, firstly myself, but then the team, to be able to do a really good job of those big pitches? Because there was one that did work, where we did some work for 3M. And that was a 6-figure deal, which in the context of the software business that was for SpiderGap, which is a 360-degree feedback tool, a 6-figure deal is huge in that
Huge,
industry.
yeah.
Like our average customer value is probably around the 2,000 a year kind of level. So as a result, having a six-figure deal was significant. And I now see other software business owners who have built more valuable, higher revenue, higher profit businesses than mine, and they've done it in 2 years rather than 10, and yet they've done it with like 20 large enterprisey
Big
clients
deals.
rather than I've got 600 plus. And of course, I have lower customer density in which reduces risk. Like if I lose one customer, it's not a big deal for me. But at the same time, like, yeah, my business could be at least double, possibly 10x the current size if we'd been better shape for those big pitches when it mattered. And in fact, I even remember my reaction to being asked to pitch, like, come down to London, do this pitch and so on. My reaction was kind of, that's not how we work.
Okay.
Um,
And
and
not being prepared
yeah,
for that.
yeah, there was, never mind plan B, C, D, E, F, G, ending back at the hotel and so on.
Yeah.
to make the proposal. Like I hadn't got plan A
Plan
in
A.
that scenario, or at
Yeah.
least my plan A was, you have a demo call online with a member of my staff and they show you it and whatever.
Right.
I had no plan B, C, D for if that wasn't the right fit for the customer. And so it's literally cost me hundreds of thousands, probably seven figures.
Interesting. If anyone from Barclays is listening, Alexis, I'm sure now has that pitch ready. So get in contact. So you've mentioned the software businesses there, and you have two successful software businesses. You have the consultancy, as you mentioned as well. But what's your story as a kid? Did you always want to go into business? Did you have that kind of entrepreneurial spark?
Oh yeah, like I think I was probably, I don't know, 10 years old when I, in my head, built my first business. What I did was with a friend in the village, we started writing a newsletter. Possibly, but I can't be sure, but possibly because I'd heard that was one of the first ways Richard Branson started his. I think he had like a student magazine.
Yeah.
And so I think I clearly thought like, that's the way I'll do it then. And so I started selling to my local village, this tiny little village that literally had a telephone box and a pub. And that was it. And I was doing this village newsletter and trying to sell those for like £1 each around the village. And people would presumably pity me and as a result pay for it. So I started really, really early, and then after that I did a variety of things, and I built websites, I sold headsets, I built computers and sold those to local businesses, and started building databases and software and websites and all these sorts of things. Really, because I loved the idea of building. Like I was always the child that would get the lemonade bottles and the cardboard tubes and the sellotape and stick it all together to make something. I really liked building things. And so for me, doing that with a business was just sort of doing it on a bigger scale, in a way that actually would mean that long term I could have it as my source of income. But I was terrible at it in the early days. It was so frustrating as well because I always felt like I was destined to be a successful entrepreneur. And yet those first 10, 15 years, like from that point, I just kept on hitting brick wall, particularly around kind of delegating and being able to grow beyond just me. I'd get, things would start working, I'd get busy, and then I wouldn't be able to scale it, and I'd decide it was the business model, and so I'd kill that business and start another one. Normally not that in that order. I'd start another business that overlap for a while, and then I'd kill one that was either not as interesting or was taking up my time or whatever. And so I just seemed to go through this cycle over and over and over again until finally kind of cracking that with my first software business with Spider Gap, and it was there that then I was able to grow it and take it to seven figures and grow this amazing team that now operate without me day to day at all. Like literally, I probably do a day a quarter with that business, and it's entirely focused on strategy. But like the difference between where I'm there and now with that and where I was is more a personal journey change than business just developing over time.
If you go back to those sort of early childhood forays into entrepreneurship, it takes a lot of courage to even just to go around the village and knock on doors and ask for a pound. I read in your biography that you got booed off stage when you were a kid. Did you have that kind of natural extrovert tendency? You speak on big stages now, but was that something that you had to develop and learn, or have you always had that in your locker?
Yeah, so I was always extrovert. I remember as a child entering a dance competition while we were on a family holiday on a like P&O ferry, and my parents like, yeah, it would have been normal to them that didn't even know that I'd entered, and there I am as a finalist dancing and then winning this dance competition. Um, uh, yeah, and so clearly I felt able to do that. Um, and as you say, like I got booed off stage not for the dancing, but for trying to do essentially stand-up comedy to school kids, right? Like
So proud.
how ill-advised that is, and not primary school. This was by this point, this was secondary school, where I mean, I was already being bullied. I don't know what I was thinking. Perhaps I thought this will stop the bullying. I'll show them if I can make them laugh. But no, that's not what it did. I mean, it didn't help that rather than write jokes and so on, I'm pretty sure at that point, I was using the internet. Like I'd kind of, as I say, I built websites in the early days of the internet in relative terms, and so clearly I thought, wow, the internet is now going to just solve this problem for me. And I guess it'd be the equivalent now of deciding you're going to do a stand-up routine and just using ChatGPT to generate it and go upstage and deliver. And so yeah, it went horrendously. And I found that was probably the first time that putting myself out there and being literally up on stage, but like in the spotlight, that was the first big time where I got rejection, like really heavy in front of everyone rejection. Um, and that was probably the first time I started to really filter, like, actually, what am I going to do here? Because I remember back at primary school, I was always putting myself forward for being the lead in the nativity plays and various plays that were kind of put on. And of course, everyone in general is really supportive, and that's something that is a really good attitude to have. As you say, when you're going and selling newsletters around the village, you need to have the attitude, which is that actually people probably aren't going to give you a really bad time. It
Yeah.
might happen, but in general, people have been pretty supportive. And in any sales activity I've done, I've I've held back in some way. I've been reticent, and then when you start doing it, you realize actually the rejection's nowhere near as bad as you thought it was going to be.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I think I did have that in me, but there were a few occasions where when I got that swell of negative feedback, I wasn't prepared for it, and as a result, it fundamentally kind of threw me off and meant that I avoided certain things, including comedy, for many many years. But maybe I'll come back to it someday.
So your early kind of career path was out of university and into a consulting firm. There's a certain degree of kind of comfort in those good jobs. How did you decide to make the leap from having a salary and a career path into taking one of those ideas and actually running with it and running the risk of starting your own business?
Yeah, so I guess before I became a management consultant, I had been trying to set up businesses, and I became a consultant because I felt like I'd been doing the things that I thought were right and not getting traction. And so I became a consultant after having done a management science degree, where in theory I was meant to learn those things, and yet it didn't seem to be working in the businesses that I was running simultaneously. And so I became a management consultant, doing that, but always with the expectation at some point I was going to go back into entrepreneurship once I'd
Right.
learned what I needed to learn. And actually, doing consulting was something I really enjoyed, more than I expected to. I really liked getting deep into a business that I didn't understand at the beginning and working out what was holding them back. And I remember in the early days of it being terrified. I remember knowing that I was being charged out essentially straight out of university after a couple of weeks training. I know I was being charged out at £960 per day. And the pressure of that, and feeling like if I don't add £960 of value today, I'm going to need to add double that tomorrow. And fortunately, I remember being sat down next to someone and being told, yeah, can you document what they're doing so that we can improve the process? And I remember they were kind of copying cells down in a spreadsheet. And I said, why don't you just copy the cells down? They were like, oh, well, no, because it needs to be different for each one. I was like, but you can just use the like autofill feature in Excel. And like literally it's like, oh, you've just taken a job that normally takes Gladys 5 hours each day, and now it can be done in 3 seconds. I was like, oh, cool. I think I've added my value.
You value,
there.
yeah.
And so I was good at that. And I did that over and over in so many different businesses, working at Honda and BP and AstraZeneca and parts of the UK government and so on, where I would take parts of the business that were taking 23 people and literally reduce that down to 3. And most of the time, there were a couple of exceptions, but most of the time it was just freeing those people up so they could do more value add work and be more creative. A couple of occasions where it was purposefully for redundancies, for cost cutting, both in government sector, and I didn't enjoy those as much for that reason, but I did enjoy the nuts and bolts of working out the kind of detailed activity. And so the leap to going into entrepreneurship was more a case of just feeling like I think I've got what I need now. And actually I met another consultant who worked in the software development practice rather than I was on business processes and people operations. And we met and became friends, and would meet at the pub, and both shared that one day our dream would be to own a software business. It's like, oh really? Me too. And then we kind of started to hatch a plan of why don't we do that together, and that I had to pitch to him that we would initially start with a consulting business, and that would give us the time, the money, and the clarity on what customers need so that we could build a software business. And so I had to pitch to him that despite the fact I'd only done 3 years at this management consultancy firm, in fact, slightly less, 2.5 years, that I would be able to get paid consulting work for us that would give us enough money to pay for both of us and give us time to develop this software product. And yeah, I was successful in my pitch, and Paddy has been stuck with me for the 13 years since.
So that first business is SpiderGap, which is a 360 degree feedback tool, and as you've said, it's used by some major organisations. Over the course of that business, and as the client base has grown, how has that pitch evolved? Like what do you notice as the major differences between how you started out and where you are now?
Yeah, it's interesting, and because I think one of the skills, to some extent, you could kind of boil down the skill of an entrepreneur down to 2 things. One is their ability to adapt and iterate and pivot to find what works, to find the right customer, the right product, the offering, the right way of pitching it, the right price point, the right marketing channel and messaging, and the right way of delivering that, and so on, so that you can get sales and deliver loads of value. The second skill is then being able to, after you've worked out what works, hand that over to someone else, which I've discovered through consulting. Actually, processes work brilliantly for this. Hand that over to someone else so that they can then get that done, which frees up your time to then go and find out what else works, what other products or what other customer groups or what other marketing channels, so that you can continue to scale and grow. And I think I was really good in the early days of doing skill number 1.
Right.
So I would go into every conversation with a customer essentially with my consultant hat on, asking what are the biggest problems that you want to solve in your business. And they would talk, in the case of Spider Gap, the sorts of people we'd talk to would tell us about, I want to, I've got issues with perhaps staff engagement or morale, or that people feel like they're not really developing, or I want to create succession planning, I want to build the leaders of the future, or I want to address these particular performance gaps, or I've got specific people in the organization that are good on performance but aren't a good cultural fit, and yet there's no way to pin that down. And so you've got all these problems. And then I would go, okay, and then I would explain our product in the context of that, and often shape the offering live on the spot, as I would as a consultant, to fit. Now that works beautifully for getting initial sales, because of course those customers go, oh wow, you get my problem and have understood it and helped me understand it better than anyone else has, and faster than I have myself. And then you've offered this tailored solution that completely maps it at a cost I can afford. Boom, there we go, we've got a customer. And so that worked really well. The problem was that couldn't be handed over, because it was requiring so much from me in terms of my skill set. It required my consulting experience and background of understanding the sorts of business problems people have and what they're likely to have tried already and the impact that this would have and so on, plus my quick thinking to, in the moment, devise what the solution would look like and turn that into a multi-phase plan of how we would work together, and then come up with a price and agree it. And I couldn't hand that over to anyone. And so really the tough work, and that took me years, was getting to a point where I could ask a standard set of questions and pitch Spider Gap in a way that was compelling, in a pretty consistent way, with some adaptation to what the customer said. It's still tailored to them, but the product's not changing. It's not like I have to go back to engineering for every single customer and say, oh, actually I've agreed this, or actually we're not going to do 3 workshops, we're going to do 5, and the second one's going to change, and so on. Like, I needed it more standard than that, so that I could train other people to do it, and so that it could actually scale. And that's what took me longer to work out. Now, in both of my software businesses, there's really well documented, here's how to run a demo call, including, right from the start, I've had to kick off the call and asking, is it okay if I record the call? And can I check how much time we've got available, and checking the stakeholders, right through to asking what questions do we ask about the business, the problem, and what solutions they've tried in the past and why they didn't work, through to how do we explain what the product does and the value it adds, what we show them at that time, what are the examples that we pull in, the case studies, the stories that bring it to life, are all captured so that anyone in my team can do it. And actually, I mean, when I say anyone, I mean anyone who has enthusiasm, good communication skills, the ability to ask questions, and listen, and that's it. Like, all the salespeople across my software businesses did not have sales experience.
Interesting.
And in fact, for them, it's very junior roles. And it partly came because when I first hired a salesperson, I hired someone who's like really highly paid, had done £1 million of sales in the previous year. And so I thought, look, I'm not a salesperson. Like, you're the expert. You tell me what you need and how you do it. And they didn't even get the results I was getting. And I've been spending a day and a half on sales, and they were meant to be spending 5 days a week on it, and they got all this experience. And I realized that actually just having the great A-player person in doesn't do it. You need the guidance, the training, the process. And you've already worked out how to sell it because you've been selling it. You just need to turn that into something else, something that someone else can follow. And so when I did that, next time round when I hired, I couldn't even afford to hire a full-time proper salesperson. I hired a VA part-time, but gave them the guidance and the checklist, and suddenly they start to get sales.
Interesting.
I was like, oh, that's interesting. I can hire junior employees on literally a third of the cost.
Yeah.
And they can, and at the time, better results. And so that's really interesting. And over the years, I've found that it's much more important to hire for cultural fit and those skills, and then give them the guidance so that they can do a really good job. So that's kind of how my pitching's evolved. Is it used to be super flexible. It then became very consistent
Yeah.
by kind of documenting it and giving it to other team members. But I'm still the entrepreneur at heart. I'm still the worst one at following the right process. And so it's best to put me on the stuff where we don't already have a process, and it's my job to work it out.
Work it out.
Because I'd like to do things slightly different every single time.
Now, you don't have a formal HR background as far as I know, but one of the things that strikes me is that you're really good at hiring and managing great people, and you've sort of alluded to that in your answer to the previous question. But were you born with that kind of people management talent? Was that one of your innate sort of skill sets, or is that something that you've had to develop through, understanding the process as well?
I used to be the worst person for managing people. I was absolutely terrible at it. I hated it. I didn't want to do it, and I avoided it wherever possible. In my first, when I was a consultant, I remember my line manager, when I was kind of telling him, "Here's my career ambitions, and I want to be the youngest partner ever in the consulting organization," and I got promoted twice whilst there in like 2.5 years or whatever.
Mhm.
And I was on track for this ascension. But one of the biggest concerns that was raised about whether I would be able to progress was my ability to bring people with me, like having
Interesting.
those people skills. And unfortunately, my line manager delivered that information to me by literally saying that I'd never be a good people manager, and that as a result I might want to reassess my career ambitions, which hit me as a gut punch.
Mm.
I think
Not
I may have
not
even cried in the meeting,
the
which
most
is not a
sensitive
great
feeling.
experience
Yeah.
with your line manager. Yeah. Um, and so, do you know the main thing I've learned from that meeting though, was that he was a terrible line
Yeah.
manager.
Absolutely.
When I reflect back now, that was the takeaway. Um, so, so I got that feedback, but that's feedback that I'd also received from a previous manager. My mum, like when I'd been like 14 years old and helping out on a project for my mum's business, I'd received similar feedback, and been fired twice, I think, at my mum's
Are you
business.
mum?
Um, yeah,
Oh wow.
exactly, by my mum in front of people. Again, tears. Um, so I, with all those experiences, when I then went back into starting first the consulting business and then software business, I went in with a plan of avoiding hiring and managing people wherever possible. I read the 4 Hour Work Week by Timothy Ferriss, which basically said, yeah, the aim is that you're going to only work 4 hours, and it's going to be answering emails from a contractor in the Philippines who's doing all the work for you, and you don't have to manage them or manage anyone, whatever. I thought that sounds ideal. Now, what I experienced is a very different outcome, including the fact that the misconception that hiring contractors means that you don't have to go through a recruitment process and manage them. Like, just because they happen to be on a contract arrangement and a freelance or part-time or whatever, if anything, maybe the importance goes up because you've got less direct contact. And so I remember a finance administrator that I hired as a contractor many years ago. Initially seemed to start fine. I actually did take them through a bit of a recruitment process, but didn't really do much onboarding training. But they, in theory, came with bookkeeping experience, so it's fine. But I avoided managing them and having any contact. And it was only when my accountant was saying, "Okay, and we're going to do your year-end accounts, everything up to date," and I went, "Yeah, it should be." And I went in, and nothing had been reconciled for 3 months. I was like, "What happened? Where's Victoria? Like, why hasn't Victoria done this?" And I checked, and like the last reconciliation she'd done was 3 months ago, and she'd just stopped working for me. She stopped billing as well. I hadn't been paying, but I hadn't noticed.
Wow.
And I realised it's like, you've got to manage people. Like the bare minimum, you've got to manage people. And I had that experience again another time when I then hired essentially an employee, but didn't kind of do the managing thing. I was like, oh yeah, you can check in and whatever. but they left after 11 months with us. And the main reason, they didn't feel engaged, supported, managed, valued, etc. And that's because I wasn't investing the time. I wasn't doing weekly one-to-ones, which now every single person across all of my businesses has a weekly one-to-one with a manager.
Yeah.
And that's a really important 30-minute call that allows them to check in and share anything that's going on for them, like that's either frustrating them, work or personal, that they can get their manager's input on things that they need to do. And I found that that's really important. And that is essentially a process that's in place for me and every manager in my across my organizations, to make sure that we've got people in the organization that aren't disengaged and are supported and so on. We have that for quarterly performance reviews, 6 monthly 360 feedback and personal development planning. We have it for daily huddles, so that despite the fact that all of my businesses are 100% remote and we have people in 9 countries across 5 continents, no one goes more than a day or two without having a call that includes other members of the team, where they're sharing their wins and reviewing our key metrics and reviewing our progress against our goals. So even if you're a software developer working deep in some code all on your own on this solo project, you don't end up going, oh my God, it's been a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks longer.
Yeah.
And feeling disconnected and like you don't have this kind of connection, friendships and so on. So, and that daily huddle is just one example. I've got various others, but I highlight these very tactical things because that was the thing that unlocked it for me. When previously I saw managing people as a set of opaque people skills, an attitude, and a capability that I needed to develop, but had no idea how, and quite the opposite, had been told that I didn't have what it takes. Instead, by approaching it basically by putting in the structures, the meeting rhythms, the checklists and so on, I was then able to get to a point where I and anyone in my organization could be the best line manager that their employees had ever had. And that's feedback that I've received, and it's received feedback that my line managers have received, because they're consistent in doing that. And that's what changed things. It was changing that approach, rather than thinking I had to develop this competency, this soft skill around managing people. I realized, actually, no, it's more about what you do and the questions you ask and so on. And as a result, we've now got a super happy team. We haven't had anyone leave for reasons of not being happy or supported or whatever in over 5 years. And all of that's down to that change approach.
That's fascinating.
And that's not where I started. I started off terrible.
A very different approach, I think, than the most businesses have, especially in that kind of early growth phase where it can be a little bit chaotic. When you're recruiting people, often candidates feel like they're pitching to the company. How much attention do you pay to pitching your business to the candidate, or do you see it as their job to pitch to you, or is it both?
I think that's such a good question, because most businesses that I've worked with think of hiring as very much the candidates are pitching themselves to us, and we're going to pick, and they're lucky that they're being given a job. Whereas we always saw it as very much a two-way street. In the same way as your sales and marketing should be. It should be that the customer is evaluating you, but equally you're evaluating whether they're a good fit, and you're qualifying them, whether they're going to be a nightmare later on, and whether they're going to see sufficient value. And so it is a two-way street. And so throughout our recruitment process, we consciously have points where we are communicating things about the business intentionally to create engagement for them. So, for example, even in the advert that we use, we include, here's our 5 core values and here's what that means for us. We include a focus on the fact that although we're a fully remote company and that creates flexibility and so on, we do have this annual meetup where we bring everyone together, and here's a photo from the meetup and here's the team. We have, right at the beginning of the whole advert is about, like, why would you want to work for our company, rather than what most businesses do is, here's what we're looking for.
Yeah,
we want a finance person with 10 years of experience, bookkeeping, blah, 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 blah. You've probably got this qualification, and you've got a university degree, and you've had, whatever. and it's all like, this is what I want. And you wouldn't do that in an advert. You wouldn't put an advert in the paper and go, yeah, so we're a business that's looking for customers that are going to spend 10 grand or more. They're going to stay with us at least 5 years. They have probably got budget for that. And you're like, you wouldn't do that. And yet that's exactly what people are often doing when it comes to the hiring process. And then again, in the sales process, you wouldn't, you wouldn't do these crazy things that people do in the hiring process where it's like just getting people like, okay, tell me about yourself. Tell me about, okay, let me take you through your CV. Instead, what we do is we have it, and it's scripted as part of the interview checklist. We'll have a bit where we do a little bit of explanation about, for example, when we're asking about remote working and whether they've done remote working before, because we know that if this is the very first time you're doing remote working, you've got to be approaching it in the right way with eyes open about the disadvantages as well as the advantages. Now, we don't just say, we're a remote company. Have you done remote working before? And if not, tell me why you want remote working, what you see as the pros and cons. Instead, we start with, we're a remote company, and here's why. Here's what that feels like. Here's how we make sure that despite the fact that you're working remotely, you don't feel remote.
Yeah.
And so we explain some of the what mechanisms we do that, because we want them to be like, oh, wow, yeah, I am looking for a remote company. These guys feel like they've really worked out what that should feel like. And then we ask the question. And we do that throughout the recruitment process. When we're asking a question about one of our core values, focus on impact, we won't just say, give me an example of when you've demonstrated good focus on impact. We'll say, our number one core value is that we focus on impact, which means because we believe that we want to have a really life-changing impact on the customers that we work with, and we focus on the outcome rather than getting too caught up in the detail of what that is. And we expect that from everyone in the organization to ask questions to really challenge and understand whether we're working on the right things. Can you give me an example of when you've demonstrated focus on impact? And again, for them, they're learning and thinking, oh yeah, wow, I'm going to work in a business where they really value the feedback and the input of employees. They're going to make sure that I understand why I'm working on stuff. And we have that all the way through. It's not like at some point we send them a slide pack to explain the company. It's threaded through every single part, so that by the end, we've had recruitment processes where maybe there's 10 candidates. And sometimes we'll get literally over 1,000 applicants for a single role. Sometimes it's hundreds. But we've had processes where we've ended up with 8 to 10 candidates where we're like, you know what? If I had 10 vacancies, I'd hire all of them. But I've only got 2 right now. And so we hire 2 and put the rest on what a term that we got from the book, How to Hire A Players by Eric Herencole, is putting them on the farm team, where basically you keep in touch, and if a vacancy then becomes available and it works for them, then you've got someone you can immediately hire rather than having to start the recruitment process again. Really powerful. It's helped me grow my business much faster because we've had that bench strength to be able to pull people in when needed. But the amazing thing is, I remember one particular candidate who was third, right? It wasn't the first 2, came third. And I was like, oh, such a shame, but unfortunately, no. And I gave some feedback over what it would have taken and like what could be improved. And because she is in line with our core values, and our 4th core value is always look to improve, she took that properly and developed that at her current place of employment. And in fact, then got another job and went there. And I remember that we had these check-ins, and I remember when I then said to her, "Look, I know it was, I think it was about a year later, or maybe slightly less than a year since she first applied to us, but it was, I want to say, 4 or 5 months after she'd started a new role, and so not ideal timing, right? You've not been in the company very long. It's going to look bad on your CV that you went somewhere and then left." But she decided to join us, and she decided to join us because what she said to me was, the place I'm working now, like of my checklist of the 5 things I want, it's got like 4 of them. But what I learned about Spider Gap is you've got all 5, and you are my ideal place to work. And so even though it was going to look back on the CV and she felt bad like on her leaving day and so on, it ended up being a really good decision for her, and she's still with us and moved from basically a sort of low-level role into one of our exec team roles. And she's one of my best hires ever, right? But the key was that throughout the process, we'd sold us to her. We'd pitched
Yeah.
our business to her as an employer to the point that even a year later, I could turn up and say, we've now got a role, and she would leave like that and come work for us.
Amazing story. You've talked a lot about the kind of team culture that you've built and the ability for the business to operate without you. And I know back in 2022 you took a road trip across Europe with the family for 6 weeks. Now there's lots of people managers and business owners listening to this podcast thinking like, how is that even possible? How could I take that sort of extended time off and not allow things to collapse behind me? What steps would you recommend that people take to start making that a reality for themselves? What are the kind of foundations that you need to lay?
Yeah, so so I have done the 6 weeks. It didn't happen overnight, is the kind of obvious statement. To some extent, it's like if you want to be able to take 6 weeks out of the business, you need to be able to start. You need to start by being able to take 1 day out of the business. And really, it's worth thinking about, what does it take to end up being able to take 6 weeks? And the answer is, well, it's all down to the tasks and activities that you need to be able to do, that only you can do in the business.
Right.
So, for example, for you to be able to take 1 day out of the business, the sorts of activities that can't wait till the following day are probably sales conversations and things like that. You can't have a business where as soon as you're out for 1 day, all selling stops.
Yeah.
That it can't work. So that's one of the activities. But then there's tasks that perhaps can go a few days, but can't really go more than a week. So you might say like chasing payments against your invoices. Like you don't want to get that to get too high, you're going to run out of cash. So that might be something. Then there's activities that you can probably cope a few weeks, but then as soon as it ticks over a month, you're going to have problems. So it might be some tax stuff, like your VAT return would be normally quarterly, but you can't miss it. Like it's like if you're at the end of the quarter, you can't miss that. Or doing our month-end accounts so that we have visibility and the leadership team have visibility of what's happening with our revenue and costs. That can probably wait a couple of weeks or a few weeks, but it can't wait more than a month. You start to really significantly impact the business. And then when you're getting to 6 weeks plus, it means that pretty much everything has to have been able to be done by someone else that isn't you, and that the people don't have questions that mean that they need to call you. Because that's the other important thing. It's not just I was 6 weeks away. It was 6 weeks where I didn't need to be contacted. Like the team could solve their own problems. And in fact, in one of my software businesses, literally this at the point of recording, like this week, I've had a team member hand in their notice for really good reasons. They're a good leaver, like they're off to pursue a career essentially in sort of acting and in video and so on. And that's awesome. I'm really, really pleased for them. And they were with us like 5 years. But what I love most is that literally the entirety of my involvement has been just reviewing the email that to go out to the whole company to let people know, and sending the leaver a WhatsApp message just to say, hey, just heard the news and so on. That's it. Everything else is being managed by the team, like offboarding them, removing them from tools, sorting out final payroll, working out how much holiday pay they had remaining, like all of that being done by the team without having to then ask me questions. So that's what it takes. How do you get there is a slightly longer answer. We do actually have at Air Manual, we've got a guide that takes you through this 4-stage approach that we use, which people can get at airmanual.link/discover. And that's in that 4 stages. We say, well, don't. The first stage is focus, because we say don't try and document the whole business. Like I've just gone through a series of tasks where you could say, right, if I can just get them documented and delegated and handed over, and that the team can all do it, then my time is free. It's like, great. But don't start on day one going, right, I'm going to document the entire business and spend weeks and weeks and weeks documenting, because firstly, you won't find time for that because you'll get busy, but also you won't get the benefit fast enough. You'll end up with a pile of documents that may or may not be any good and go out of date and so on. So you want to do it iteratively. You want to be solving a problem at a time. So we say stage 1 is focus. Identify what's the biggest problem to solve right now. Is it that you're spending too much time on sales? Is it that too many mistakes are being made in operations? Is it that people are feeling not engaged and developed, and therefore it's kind of, or that you've got poor performers who are being tolerated? So you need to sort out performance management. What is your biggest problem holding back your business right now? So that's stage one. Second is outline. What are the series of tasks that, if they could be handed over and done well, would solve that problem, just at a high level? Then step three is what we call prioritize, document, and test. So of those tasks, which one are you going to start with? Document it initially at a high level, add some of the detail on how to avoid common mistakes and so on, and then test it, which means getting someone else to follow through and checking it off as they go along. And any questions that they have or mistakes that they make or about to make, improve the guidance, the document, the checklist, so that someone else doesn't make that same mistake or question. And you go through that and you get them to test it and you make the changes and so on. And then you go back to prioritize, document, test. So then you might go and do that for another task and so on. You repeat that loop until you solve the problem, until that performance management process is now working to effectively manage people and support them in increasing their performance or exit from the business. Or that sales process is reliably getting a decent conversion rate of your leads. And do so efficiently. Like, you repeat that cycle until that's doing, and then the fourth stage is you make it easy to manage. And we do that through a process dashboard where you can see, here's the activities that my, let's say, finance team need to be doing every day, week, month, quarter, year, 2 year, and that they, more importantly, that they can see when it next needs doing and who's the owner of it. And it means that that is the ultimate in many ways in terms of delegation, because now no longer am I even having to be the one going, hey, have you renewed our business insurance? So you've forgotten to do it. Like, they're self-managing. They just, as part of a fortnightly team meeting, they review that dashboard and go, oh, yeah, business insurance needs renewing. Let's follow the process, get 3 quotes, review it, agree it, get it signed off, done. And I don't need to be involved. Literally, the only thing that happened with renewing our business insurance recently is the insurer contacted me and said, oh yeah, so I've got your insurance documents all ready here, and da-da-da-da. And I went, yeah, a member of my team's dealing with that. Have you got their details? And they're like, oh yeah, I've got them here. I was like, yeah, great, you can call them. They've got everything you need. And it's just like,
So
done.
you mentioned the name of your new business, Air Manual, and it's a brilliant tool for allowing people to, as you say, kind of create those processes and checklists that they need in a very dynamic way. I know that you are a kind of checklist geek, and that you even have a checklist for getting the kids out to school in the morning. There are people out there that kind of think, well, my brain just doesn't work in that way, and what I put down today might be different tomorrow. What would you recommend to people in order to kind of create that first process? What's the biggest hurdle that they need to get over?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a few kind of steps to go through. So the first and in terms of overcoming mental obstacles, so the first one is to realize that everything, and indeed anything, can be delegated. And one way of thinking about that is, imagine Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, whoever entrepreneur of your choice bought your business. How many of the tasks that you're doing over the next week do you think they would expect to be doing each week?
Yeah.
The reality is probably 0. So therefore, the issue is not that the things that you're doing can't be delegated. It's that you haven't delegated them yet. And so that's the first thing to realize. The second thing is then to say, but the solution is not to delegate everything immediately. It's to follow that 4-stage process of focus on a thing and prioritize, document, test, and so on. So that's the next thing, is don't try and document stuff just because it's easy or because you're going for completion. Prioritize and document and delegate the things that are going to move the needle the most. The third thing is, when you're then getting into that task. So let's say I ran a workshop recently where live on the session we documented a particular process, and for him it was creating a price quote and sharing a proposal. And the amazing thing was that in a very short period of time, like 5-10 minutes, we got the high level steps done. In fact, it's 5 minutes. We got the high level steps done and the key detail on what was required. Now, if he had just tried to start it on his own, I think he'd have stared at a blank page for quite a while.
Yeah.
And so often it's getting over blank page paralysis. Now, one of the things that we've done recently in Air Manual is to leverage AI so that in Air Manual you can literally go, right, create page. What do you want to create? I want to create a task checklist. Great. What do you want it to help someone to do? And it'll be like how to. So it'll be like send a price quote. Great. It'll search our template database because we've got loads of those, or you can start with a blank one, or you can use AI. You click use AI and provide a bit of context like, this is this, we receive proposals through this particular route. We need to do a feasibility study. We need to do this, credit check, whatever, and then send it off. And like literally just a little text box to explain that. And then you click generate, and the combination of our best practice guidance around how to do a really good job of writing checklists, because there are nuances that can make two checklists completely different in terms of speed of following and easy to understand. Like you can create an absolute mess, right? Where each checklist step is too long to read and you can't scan it, and it's not even clear what you're meant to do from that step, or that they put too much information in. And so we have a load of best practice that we combine that with the context you provided, an API into ChatGPT. It pulls it back through, it formats it in our interactive checklist format, which means that you've got a great starting point. The key is that you're still going to need to do the prioritized document test cycle to test it and add the screenshots and videos and little bits of help content and so on. But the key is to get over that first hurdle of getting the high level steps end to end done. Because the temptation is, if you go into the detail, you'll be like say it's for sending a price quote, it's like understanding client requirements. You'll have this you'll go right into the detail of, okay, we need to look for this and this and this and this and this. And by the time you look up from your desk, you realize you spent half an hour just doing that step, and you haven't got any of the other high level steps, and now you have to go on something else. Whereas you'd be better off spending 5 minutes, get the high level steps, then go, where do I actually need to provide more guidance? Add that in where needed, start testing it, get someone else following it, and you might realize that you need less guidance than you thought. And that's that key. It's that resisting the temptation to try and document all of the nth degree of detail. And there's a phrase from a business leader that we both know, Daniel Priestley. In fact, he's been on your podcast, I believe, where he said that you need to build the bridge all the way across. You get nothing for building an amazing bridge that goes halfway.
Amazing.
And that's the same for when you're documenting processes. It's far more effective to have the high level steps and no detail than it is to having 3 steps of a 10-step process detailed to maximum, right? And so that's the next step, is like get to a point where we've just got that high level step. And then the absolute critical piece, and I shared it in the 4 stages, is the testing. So many business leaders act like documenting the process means it's done. It's like, no, it's not done until you solve the problem, until someone is actually using that checklist to do the work better than you, more consistently than you, and free you up. Typically, we've found 15 hours a week is like the first impact that we get when we get someone to hand over a task. That's the impact. It's like, that's what you're aiming for. And I see so often they're like, oh yeah, we'll test that at another point. It's like, no. Don't start documenting another thing
until you've
get that tested and implemented and being used before you start moving to other things.
Amazing advice. Alexis, I could geek out on this stuff all day. It's not in my sweet spot, but I find it absolutely fascinating. But I want to wrap things up by kind of zooming out. You've had a really successful career as an entrepreneur. If you could go back and give that 12-year-old boy wandering around the village trying to sell newsletters to villagers one piece of advice, what would it be?
It would be, work out what works and get it handed over to someone else. Because that was the biggest mistake I made, was that I spent too much time continuing to iterate on stuff that was already working, and I never handed anything over to anyone else until way, way, way too late. And if I'd done that in those early days, even with doing the newsletter, what was the big difference between me and Richard Branson when it came to that newsletter? He very quickly assembled a team of people writing it and all that kind of stuff. Whereas instead, it was just me and this other person in the village doing it, and we never grew it. We never got anyone else involved. to do more. You know, as a result, in theory, that newsletter could have grown and become one of the local county magazines that we, you know, all seem to get now.
Yeah.
And of course, it's like those are done by organisations that started off in one place and then just replicated that model. Every business that I've ever started, I made the assumption that I'd got the model wrong, like that business couldn't grow. I think every single time I was wrong. I was thinking about the problem all wrong. I should have been saying what bits work, get that done by someone else, so that I can then work on the other stuff.
Amazing advice. Alexis, thank you for joining me on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It will take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalised report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.